Hello, everyone. My name is Annabella Kobos, and today I'm going to be presenting my manager analysis to inform you all on the power and influence that is present within the movie The Devil Wears Prada. But before we begin with this presentation, I would like you all to envision yourselves within a specific scenario. So imagine that you're in your work office space and you receive a phone call informing you that your boss is on their way over to the office. Instantly, you and your coworkers are in a panic, dropping everything to make sure that everything is perfect for your boss's arrival. The very presence of your boss creates a high stress environment. So the question is, why do you, or why would anyone, work for an individual that causes a high stress environment? By the end of this presentation, we will be able to answer that question. Moving on to today's agenda and what we're going to cover. First, we're going to go over an introduction and introduce you all to the manager that we are going to be analyzing throughout the presentation. Secondly, we are going to be discussing the types of power that individual shows throughout the film. Thirdly, we are going to talk about the contingencies that relate to those types of power. Then we are going to talk about the effectiveness of those types of powers and the contingencies, as well as we are going to be going over a brief summary. So let's get started with the introduction. So meet Miranda Priestley. Miranda Priestley is the editor-in-chief of Runway, a high fashion magazine. She is a huge figure in the fashion industry. Her employees refer to her as being married to the work. She struggles with a home life, and this is seen with her 2 daughters and her 2 failed marriages. So now that we've introduced Miranda, let's go ahead and talk about her different types of powers and influences that she shows within the film. So the first type of power that Miranda has is legitimate power. This is seen through her position as editor-in-chief. She holds a high title within the organization, and thus she has authority over her subordinates and assistants. Looking at this graphic provided from hierarchystructure.com, we see a generic hierarchy that comes from the journalism industry, which Miranda falls under. We see that editor-in-chief is the second in command, and we see all the positions that fall beneath the editor-in-chief. So this graphic really reinforces the legitimate power that Miranda holds within the company. Furthermore, Miranda has expert power. She is the head of the magazine, and she has been for decades, meaning that she has decades worth of knowledge of the fashion and market trends. Many employees say that they would die to have a job with her because her knowledge leads to so many different opportunities. There is even the quote that her opinion is the only opinion that matters. There's a scene in the film where a fashion designer shows Miranda the line that they had created. Miranda made one face, and instantly that face caused the fashion designer to make the decision to change their entire line because they felt that Miranda was displeased, just thus reinforcing that her opinion is the only opinion that matters. Furthermore, Miranda has coercive power. This is seen through the start of the film when her presence incites panic. Everybody wants to do everything perfect because they know that they can be fired. This moves us into the second point, that Miranda can threaten to fire people. There is also throughout the film that Miranda appears to have power and influence in the future of employees. For instance, there was an old assistant that got fired, and they said that now that assistant is working as a TV guide, meaning that the job that they had after working with Miranda was not that great because Miranda had a lot of influence in where they landed. And since Miranda was displeased with that assistant's work, they did not get a very good recommendation for their job in the future. With coercive power, Miranda also has reward power, and this is seen through her ability to determine who goes to Paris Fashion Show Week and who doesn't. Throughout the film, we see employees really busting and hustling to make Miranda happy and do everything they can because they know that Miranda holds the power to reward them with going to Paris Week Fashion Show. Now that we've talked about the different types of powers that Miranda shows throughout the film, let's talk about the contingencies of power. So some of the contingencies of power include substitutability, centrality, discretion, and visibility. Starting with substitutability, when we look at Miranda, she holds 10 years worth of experience as the head of this magazine. It is very hard to find a substitute for Miranda with somebody that has that much expertise and that much knowledge. Therefore, the substitutability for Miranda is low. With centrality, centrality essentially revolves around if Miranda were to be taken out of the company, what would it look like? Without Miranda, a lot of the employees would leave. Many of the employees are there because Miranda is there and because she is so respected and well known in that industry, and because people know of her expert power and legitimate power, many people are there. So if you take out Miranda, lots of things would fall apart within that system. When it comes to discretion, as we saw before on the graphic of the hierarchy system, there's only one individual above Miranda. And furthermore, when we watch the film, we see that even Miranda's boss really trusts her with making the right calls and the decisions. So the discretion is not something that Miranda has to obtain. Lastly, there's visibility. And because Miranda has been in this position for so long, her visibility is very high. People look at her and associate her with the Runway brand, and that really brings value to the company. So now looking at the effectiveness of all the different types of power and the contingencies of power, we can conclude that within the contingencies, that Miranda has a very high capacity to which she can leverage her different types of power and make things happen within the organization. We also see high levels of commitment within her legitimate power, expert, coercive, and reward. We see throughout the film that the employees are doing everything they can to commit to Miranda, to commit to the brand, and to have an overall effective organization. Now let's do a quick summary. First, we talked about power and influence. We talked about legitimate, expert, coercive, reward, and how Miranda held all those types of powers. And then we talked about the contingencies of power, which led us to the conclusion that Miranda was able to command authority over her followers in many different situations, thus contributing to her being an effective leader. So before we wrap up this presentation, I want us all to reflect back on that question that I asked at the very beginning over why would somebody work for a boss that might create a high stress environment, much like Miranda Priestley. And the answer is because although it might not be the ideal work situation to work in, the benefits and the opportunities that come along in the long run by working for somebody like Miranda Priestley are very beneficial and can put you through the right doors and give you very great opportunities. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.